Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thanks for clicking on this video today. Part 2 of the 2008 Mustang Bullitt build. We're going to be finishing up the clutch install today, or I should say the Spec 2 clutch install today. We're going to have a part 3 coming out after that, which is going to be installing the Vortech V3 SI Supercharger kit. This is just a little sneak peek of it. It's actually a water-to-air intercooler kit. There's the intercooler, and there's the head unit. So I've actually already started on the build. I've already got the heat exchanger in, got the pump for the heat exchanger installed, a few more little things done. I'm going to be working on that in the next couple of days. So be sure to check out part 3 when that video comes out. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right to the video. And there's the clutch. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that thing off of there and see what the flywheel looks like. Clutch feels really good. I mean, it's not even slipping or nothing. There's really nothing wrong with this clutch. Honestly, it doesn't have that many miles on it. So he just wanted to change it, which I think with the amount of power that this thing's gonna make, it's not going to kill the world, you know, because of you can't really throw a whole lot of power to these motors. That stock clutch would have been just fine, but you know, he wanted to go ahead and put a better clutch in it with the supercharger, so we went with an affordable selection with the Spec Stage 2. I'm not going to worry about doing it in the star pattern to make it even, since we're replacing it. Gotta get it loose from the dowel pins. There's 3 dowel pins on this. And there we go. All right, so got that out of there. And the flywheel really doesn't look too bad. It's got a little bit of heat generated on it, but it's not, doesn't have like bad hot spots. It's pretty much throughout the whole deal. We didn't get another flywheel, so this thing was disengaging, engaging smooth. Wasn't no chatter, wasn't no shaking. He said that it wasn't slipping or anything, and it's smooth release all the time. So that tells me that it's not warped at all, or doesn't have high spots. So with that, I want to go ahead and just use my sanding disc and my air tool, and I'm going to sand it and get all the glaze off of it. I'm going to do all that because I could send it out to get it resurfaced, but man, there just ain't nobody that resurfaces these things anymore. There's a couple machine shops that actually have the machine to do it, but the turnaround, it's just going to take too long. See, normally I just replace them. We put factory replacement ones on there, or we put SFI approved flywheels on, depending on the application. And that's what I always ask the customers, you know, is it Well, obviously, if we're gonna make some big power, we just throw a new one on there, a new flywheel, SFI, billet, steel, aluminum, whatever. But with the amount of power that this thing is going to be making, really don't need it. So I could have went with a factory replacement one, but I asked him if it was having any issues with shaking or chattering or anything like that when you release, and he says no, it was totally smooth. So that tells me that there's no high spot. So I'll clean this one up and I'll sand it. I'll use my little air tool with the sanding disc, and I'll be able to clean that thing right up. See, that cleaned up really nice. I mean, it feels really good. There's no high spots or anything on it. Obviously, if he told me that it was chattering or shaking when it got hot or whatever, letting the clutch out, then we would have either had it resurfaced, but honestly, I would have just bought another one. Hell, you can get these, factory replacement ones, for just a little bit more than what it costs to resurface one. So I'm going to change that pilot bearing out. I'm going to go ahead and get this pilot bearing pulled out of here. You definitely want to change the pilot bearing. Generally, anytime you do a clutch, most of the clutches come with new ones. This goes in the back of the crankshaft, and the input shaft of the transmission goes into this pilot bearing. That's pretty much what supports the input shaft. The pilot bearing in the back of the crankshaft, and then of course the front bearing on the transmission. So there's a lot of different ways of removing these. As you can tell, see on the back of this, it's got this little cutout in it. And this is a big solid metal sleeve, and then the bearing is actually pressed into that sleeve. And whenever I use my puller to pull this out, most of the time this bearing comes out first and leaves this metal sleeve in there. And once the bearing comes out, then I can go back in there and grab a hold of this metal sleeve and pull it out. So what I use is I've had this thing for years, I mean a long time, and it's been holding up. It's a snap-on 14 piece. It's a mini slide hammer deal, and it's got this attachment that screws on. Actually, it has a lot of different attachments, but this one I use, and then it's got these arms. It's got two different sizes. I used a longer one, plus it has a little bit more of a lip sticking out to bite a hold of that. This one's got a lot smaller of a lip. I don't think I might have used this one time on something. So I get both of these and fit them on here. And you can obviously kind of go both ways, but we have to face these out. Let me go ahead and get these loaded up. It's just got a pin that goes through, locks it in place. It's got a little ball there that keeps it from coming out. And then as I screw this in, the tip of this threaded rod will force these out and lock them against the bearing. So basically just try to get a hold of there's really no way to get the whole metal spacer. Sometimes the whole thing will come out, but usually it's just the bearing. See how it grabs a hold of the bearing there? And it popped it right out. And it left the metal sleeve in. So now, all right, had a phone call. So let me go in here and I turn this until I get locked into those two areas on the back of that metal sleeve I showed you. And I try to tighten it up pretty good. Oh yeah, it's coming right out. So you can see where I've got them inside those little areas on that metal sleeve. Came right out. So I got this pop bearing out. I'm gonna go in here and clean this up a little bit. Make sure it's nice and smooth and there ain't no burrs on the back of this crank where that bearing goes in. It looks good. I use a impact socket and I make sure that it fits around the outside. You definitely don't want to touch the inside where the bearing is because it sticks up just a little bit from that metal spacer there. So want to just drive it in. A lot of times it's good to put it in the freezer too, and it shrinks it up real good. But most of the time you can just drive them right in. They don't go in too awful bad. Let's see how this one does. You want to make sure it's straight too. See, it's going straight in. And it's not even taking too much to go in there. Looks good. All right, I usually like to get this nice and clean. Definitely hit it with some brake clean and also the pressure plate on the clutch. Always get it cleaned up with some brake clean. Don't want any residue or anything getting on the clutch disc. So, okay, so I got the clutch put in. I'll go over a couple of things on this deal. So, as you know, I got the flywheel all cleaned up. Went ahead and replaced the pilot bearing. And so, the factory pressure plate bolts. There's kind of confusion whether these things are torque to yield or not. You know, they say that they are, they say that they're not, whatever. I normally replace them with ARP bolts anyway. So I forgot to order ARP bolts, whatever. So I have used these before. They usually torque them to about 40-45 foot-pounds. I clean the threads up and I put Loctite on them. Since this car is going to be boosted with a supercharger, you know, I don't want to take no chances. So what I did is I went to the local hardware store and I picked up a set of, these are 10mm by 150 thread pitch. and these have lock washers on them. So what I did is I picked up a set of Allen head bolts that are a little bit shorter. They're basically going to be the same length without the lock washer because I put Loctite on them. And these bolts, the factory ones, have a 9.8 stamped on them. I'm not sure if that's a 9.8 rating as far as the strength goes. You know, metric runs, they have a 10.9, and I forget what the lower rating is on them, an 8.8 I think. So, but anyway, you know, obviously these are pretty strong. But just so you guys know, if you want to go this route, you can. Let me show you what I got. All right, so these bolts here, they're an Allen head bolt. They're dark in color, and these are a 12.9 strength rating. These things are super strong. I've used them before on a lot of different applications. The flat part of the head is the same size as if you was using a lock washer, and these bolts are a little bit shorter than the bolts that came out of it because the bolts that came out of it had a lock washer. These are the same exact length from the bottom of the head to the end of the bolt as the factory bolts without a lock washer. I don't know if you can see, I actually check here. It's hard to, yeah, you can see a little bit sticking out. That's exactly how the factory bolts were. You can't have them sticking out any further, obviously, because you might end up hitting this plate even though it has a lot of clearance. So anyway, what I'm getting at is, I normally get ARP bolts. And they're not very expensive. I think this is 6 bolts, and I don't remember. I'd have to look them up, but you know, probably 25 bucks, whatever, 30 bucks. So I got 6 of these bolts, 12.9 rating. They're probably just as strong as ARP, if not stronger. And they were $1.19 a piece. So you're talking under $7 for 6 bolts, and these things are super strong. They are not going to break at all. So that's always an option, you know, if you forget to use ARP or whatever. Now, as far as installing this thing, I basically got it dead center. Let me put this light here. I wouldn't get a show installing this. It's all the same, but I get the clutch disc up, I get the pressure plate up, I get it started, I get all the bolts in, and then I use this tool that comes with it. And this is really important, as you guys know, to get this thing lined up 100% to the pilot bearing in there. And I usually, once I put it in, get it a little snugged up, I can move up and down, side to side, and I just do it a couple times until I'm in the center. Then I snug it a little bit, I pull it out, and I look at it real close. And then also sometimes what I'll do is I'll measure from the edge of this to the edge of these teeth here on both sides and up and down. And once you get that measurement even, you know this is going to go straight in, because you got to have that input shaft going straight in, and you'll never get the transmission back in. So that's it for that deal. I basically wanted to let you guys know about these bolts. They're awesome, man, if you ever run into a bind. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and replace the slave cylinder. The slave cylinder on this one was in good shape. Car has about 50-something thousand miles on it, and the bearing on the slave cylinder, this is the new one, it was, you know, it has some wear on it, and it was a little noisy when I was spinning the bearing. So I went ahead and got a new one, and I just wanted to show you guys. I went ahead and took the other one out. A lot of people have problems getting these things out. I don't want to take this cap off for now, but anyway, this part goes inside here and it clicks in. So in order to get this out, once you take the two 10mm bolts out, let me get my flashlight in here. I'm going to pull this back out. See if you can see. You can see that little tab sticking out right there. I'm going to point here with the screwdriver. That little tab right there. There's one on that side, and there's one on the other side right here. And that tab actually, those two tabs, actually lock behind this big lip right here. They actually lock behind there. I think right in there, there's a little lip. So when you pop that in, it pops in. A lot of guys have a hard time getting this out, and they end up breaking that plastic piece because it is plastic. So what you got to do is you just have to get in there. I use needle nose. I actually use needle nose, and I'll go in there on either side of the line, and I spread this open just like that, pull it right out, no problem. I've seen so many guys break these, and this thing is, I don't know, it's kind of important because it does hold everything in place for sure. And then this part, goes right here, and you can see it's got a little bit of a lip there, and that lip will fit inside the hole perfectly. Once you have everything lined up, it fits in there perfectly, and it's even got a lock on it right here. It's really hard to see, but it's got a little lock on it so this doesn't turn. It stays in the up position. So it's really important for this not to break. And then once that thing is sticking out, you slide this on, you make sure it's in all the way, and then you put the metal clip in there. And it's the same metal clip that they all use. So you have to pull the clip out in order to get the metal line, out, the clutch line. And then once you pop the clutch line back in, you have to pop that clip back in. Now this one comes from the clutch master cylinder. You don't have to pull this one all the way out. You can see it's got these ears on them that it's bent down on that side and it's bent up on that side. And this is in the locked position. And you basically get you a little screwdriver or whatever, and you pull this pin out. You pop the pin out. It's not going to come out all the way, and that's when you actually pull your clutch line out. Now, before you put your clutch line in, you want to close this, and then you pop your clutch line in. When you pop it in, the clip actually opens up and then snaps around or inside the groove on the clutch line. So that's kind of how that works. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the slave cylinder in. All right, so I ended up, once I got the old slave out, I cleaned everything up here. So another thing too is, this one doesn't have it, but you can see how this has got a lip in here. This section is also lipped out. So this thing fits on there. I don't want to pop it in yet, but this thing fits on there perfect and sits back. Now, some of these had a spacer behind them. Whether it don't matter if it's a GM product or a Ford or whatever, sometimes they have a spacer. So you got to make sure that that spacer goes back in, or in some applications, aftermarket clutches that have different flywheels or whatever, they actually have spacers that have to go in them. Sometimes you have to measure the distance between this and your pressure plate. And there's a whole formula to do that. I'm not going to go into that. That can be kind of a pain in the butt, but that's another thing that you kind of have to do, is measure to make sure you have enough throw when you push the pedal that this disengages the clutch enough or not enough. But this is this clutch that I'm using is a factory replacement Spec stage 2. There's nothing that needs to be changed. It can be used with the factory flywheel and everything. So I got it all cleaned up. I'll just put a little Loctite on these bolts. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in, and at the same time I'm gonna line it up with this plastic tab, and I want it to pop in there. Easy as that. These little bolts here don't take much torque at all. They're really small. I didn't look up the torque specs. As small as these things are, I want to say they're probably going to be somewhere around, you know, 15 foot-pounds. That's probably it. So, but I'm just going to snug them up, crank them down a little bit, and that's it. It's about 15 foot-pounds, 15, 20. I could tell if I was going to crank them anymore, I would have broke them. All right, I'm going to check. Make sure this is popped in there far enough. And here's the actual groove that's inside there. So when you pop that other plastic piece on that I was talking about, and you have to put this clip in, when you put it through that plastic piece, it actually goes inside that groove right there. And that's what locks it in. All right, so I got this thing ready. Everything's cleaned up. I got the shaft all cleaned up, splines cleaned up. I've already double checked, made sure that the clutch, before I put the clutch on, I always get the disc and slide it on the splines, make sure it doesn't have any nicks or burrs, because that clutch disc, you want it to slide freely on here. If it doesn't, then you can have issues disengaging the clutch. Disengaging and engaging the clutch, I should say. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and pop this on. Move that O-ring up just a little bit. Pop it on. See, if this doesn't go in far enough, it will not line up with that groove. That's why it's important to get that line from the slave cylinder out far enough so it locks in, or you'll never get this clip in here. Just like that. Yep, that looks good. Clip went all the way through. Because I tell you right now, if that clip ever, if this thing was ever to pop off, you're losing your clutch and you're making a mess. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get everything set up and get this transmission stuffed back up in the car. Well, I got the so I got transmission kind of in position. I left it exactly at the angle as I took it out, and I went up with it. I'm actually I got the input shaft about 1 inch away from the clutch itself. The closer to the clutch, the easier it's going to go in and miss the floorboard as it goes in. As I jack it up, I'm going to jack it up, keep an eye on that input shaft, and I'm going to try to go up and then start adjusting it to level the transmission out. That way I can miss the floorboard of the firewall as it goes in. got it started to go in there now. It was actually hitting the firewall back here. Now that I got it in further, I can go up and start tilting. Now we're in. Just got to go up and tilt a little more to get it lined up with the motor rod. Pretty close right there. Make sure the dowel pins are lined up. Close there. Now, I'm going to go back down in the back. Just trying to get the engine and transmission exactly even on the left and the right and the top and the bottom. So that input shaft to go straight in. Put it in gear so I can turn. Alright, see, it's already in the splines, so that's good. I might be able to get some bolts started. If I can get these bolts, if I can get them started side to side, at least I know that the dowel pins will be lined up. Oh yeah, see, these are perfect going in. So I know left and, I should say, the angle this way is good. And if I look top and bottom, it looks like it can go up in the back a little bit. And I have to go up a little bit. Okay, it's getting close here. Yep, and went in. There it went. Perfect. Slid right in. It's all lined up. I didn't even have to use the bolts to go in. I'm gonna go ahead and snug these up so I don't lose it. Just do it by hand. They're going in so easy. See if I got enough room. Yeah, I got enough room to do it by hand here. All right, that way it's all in. I don't have to worry about it slipping back out. Heck yeah, that's awesome. That went in pretty easy. So I can actually take this strap off, but I'm gonna leave it on now because I'm gonna go ahead and get all the bell housing bolts in, or at least everything on the sides. I'm gonna do the top ones up top. That way I can lower it down a little bit. I can go ahead and get the transmission harness in place where it's got to go. I got to plug in the clutch line and throw it up in there. So I got the transmission all in. Everything's done. As you remember, we got it sucked up in there good, and I went ahead and put the rest of the bell housing bolts in, tightened them down, got the starter in. Pretty much it. Went ahead and tightened up the 2 bolts for the shifter that mounts to the body. And so the O2 sensor on the driver's side actually goes into the manifold, exhaust manifold. On the passenger side, the O2 sensor is actually on the factory H pipe, about right here. And it goes all the way up and plugs in up there by the upper bell housing bolt, which I've already got those in too. And it's kind of a pain to, once everything is in, to get your, get that cable up in there. So what I normally do is I just get me a string. I'll put me a little bolt or something on it that has a little bit of weight. I've got it tied off up there. And then once I get the exhaust on, I'm going to tie this string onto the end of the O2 sensor. And then I'll be able to pull it up from the top, because I can plug it in up top. It plugs in behind the intake, which the intake is off right now, obviously. So that's a little trick. Now, what I've went ahead and done is I've went ahead and replaced this pinion seal that was leaking on this one. A little trick on these, because you have a crush sleeve in here. There's a crush sleeve between the front pinion bearing and the rear pinion bearing. And when you put the hub on, or the pinion yoke, and you start tightening it down before the axles or the carrier or anything else is in there, you have to tighten down and crush a brand new sleeve. You crush the sleeve until you get all the in play out of the bearings. And that creates preload on the bearings to the bearing cups. And generally what you want is, you want to have it tight enough but not too tight. The specs on an 8.8 is, once you get the correct preload on the bearings, you should be able to turn the pinion between, I'd have to look it up, but I think it's between 12 inch-pounds to 28 inch-pounds, 16 inch-pounds to 28 inch-pounds, something like that. I usually shoot for around 20 to 22 inch-pounds. It's a, you just want a little bit of a drag to turn it, not very much. So when you take these off, the whole rear end is still together. You take this off just to change the seal. You got to be careful not to over tighten that crush sleeve. So what I do is I take it off. I've got this kind of lifted up. I've already had some of the gear oil drain out to, a certain level. I've jacked the front of the pinion up so it angles up a little bit so it quits running out. I wipe everything clean. I make sure these new seals have a coating on them on the outside lip and along the inside lip, and that helps seal it to the housing. So you want to clean all that off real good, scrape it off, clean it off, and then I brake clean it real good. That way it's nice and dry and clean, and then it will actually seal when you put that on. So I've got that done. Then I clean this as well. I clean all this up good, make sure there's no imperfections or anything messed up here. And I also clean this up real good. And the reason why is, and that's another thing, they say you always want to change the nut on the pinion. It's kind of a lock nut. When it goes on, it really goes on tight once it gets past this outer rim. There's thread sealer on the threads, and then there's also, so you can see a little bit, I don't know if you can tell, a little bit of a purple color on here. They put a purple sealer on the flat surface. So when you get that thing tightened down and torqued, it seals against here, just in case any gear oil will come through the threads. It won't leak through the threads. Well, I put Loctite on this anyway, and that helps. But I clean all that off. I get all the old sealer off, what's left of it. I'll put a little bit of my gray RTV, it's high torque RTV on there. I'll let it sit up a little bit. And then when I start tightening this down, I run it in, I keep tightening it down until I get all the play and movement out of the bearings. And then I'm real careful with the gun to keep tightening it down until it just stops. I don't put a lot of force on the gun, I just do it very easy. Once I get all the play out, then at that point I'm at the crush sleeve. I don't want to tighten the crush sleeve anymore. When I get to that point, you generally can torque these to about 240 foot-pounds, 220 to 240, before it starts crushing the sleeve again. It takes about 230 to 40 foot-pounds to start moving that crush sleeve and start crushing it even more. So that's basically how you do it. That way you don't have to take this whole rear end apart and put a new crush sleeve in. You just don't have to do that. So that's pretty much how we do it. I'm gonna let this sit up a little bit, and then I'm gonna go ahead and run it in. I've also put a little bit of oil around here so this seal gets lubricated. We don't want it to go dry and start eating the seal up. So I basically line the splines up. I try to walk it in evenly. It goes on pretty tight on these splines anyway. I also clean the threads up on this too, so that Loctite will work. So I'm gonna go ahead and put some on here. So the Loctite is obviously going to work as a sealer, but also help keep this nut in place. Like I say, when you go putting this on, it still goes on pretty tight, even though it's a used one. Once it gets to the outside of that lip, I can't do it no more. I would have to use the gun, because it does get tight. And as I'm bumping it on, I'm keeping this. See how I can move it up and down? I try to keep it level so it goes into the seal and not damage the seal. And also pull out on it too. Keep that bearing, that inner bearing against the bearing race. Alright, so right there, I'm just kind of moving it up and down to see if I can get any movement out of the bearings. It's pretty close, almost to the crush sleeve. See, that's another reason too that I like to have this kind of jacked up, because I got so much pressure on it that I can't really move the rear end up and down at all. So that gives me better feel on this if I have any movement on the bearing. But if, right here, if I put my torque wrench on here and put the parking brake on, I could throw the torque wrench on here for about 220 foot-pounds, and it will tighten that nut up without crushing that sleeve. All right, we are good. So I went ahead and put the parking brake up. I put my torque wrench on it, set it for 220 foot-pounds, and I was able just to barely move that nut just a little bit more and hit it with the 220 foot-pound mark, and it's good. And I can tell it's got just a little bit of preload on them bearings back where it was, because I actually felt it before I took it apart. So I think we are good. No play at all. All right, so before I put the drive shaft in, I need to top off the gear oil. We didn't lose a whole lot, but I typically use the Lucas heavy duty high performance oil. This one is AEW 90, and it already has the additive in it for limited slip differentials. So I just checked it and it is low, so I'm gonna go ahead and top this thing off. All right, well, I got everything done under here. I didn't feel like showing you guys the, putting the drive shaft in or the exhaust. You actually seen how I took it out. I pretty much put it back the same exact way using the screw jack. Supported the back of it. Got the center of it bolted up to the body, and then I went ahead and got the front half attached to the transmission, and then I went ahead and got the back half. And then I always Loctite all the bolts, front and back. I even Loctited the ones going to the body. Then I used the screw jack. I put it right about here. These were hanging down. I supported this with the screw jack, brought the front up, got it lined up, put the bolts on. I did one bolt on one side, one bolt on the other, and then I was able to do the other two. Got it all tucked up where it needed to be, tightened up the front bolts. Went ahead and slid on the cat back, made sure the tips were lined up coming out of the bumper. Made sure they were all lined up nice, looking from the back of the car to the front. Make sure the tips look good, and then tighten these up. And then I double checked my tips. They look good. Now I got this string that I dropped from the bottom or from the top attached to this O2 sensor. I got to pull it up and plug it in up there by the upper bell housing bolt. And I went ahead and put these back in, got them plugged in. So I am finished up under here. So I'm going to lower this thing down. All right, so we went ahead and we got this clutch install complete. I went ahead and got the center console in. As you can see, I actually had to take all that out. Wasn't really a big deal. Got the shifter off of there, so when we drop the transmission out, the shifter stays hooked to the transmission. So yeah, I got all that back in, and we are done with this one. So I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video up as far as the transmission goes, and then I'm gonna start a new video on getting this supercharger installed. So definitely stay tuned for that one. So I should appreciate you guys hanging out with me on this. It's a little bit of a long process to replace a clutch in a car, removing the transmission, exhaust, drive shaft, all that good stuff. So anyway, I do appreciate it. You guys definitely check out our other videos, and check out the video when it comes out on the supercharger install on this deal.
Appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe, share, leave some comments below, and we'll check you on the next video.